Present Podcast.
How you doing, Kyle?
I'm good today, man. How are you?
My life is great. I have an interesting question for you today.
Great, let's do it.
So we got someone who wants to know, when do I resurrect an opportunity versus create a new one?
Okay.
I know from your time at Gigia, you probably got some thoughts on this. So yeah, I want to know what you think.
Yeah. Again, my background, I've mentioned this in the past, is primarily around enterprise sales. So this really applies to, like, if I tried to sell to, Nike and the deal dies and I have another deal with Nike, should I create a new opportunity or should I just move that back up to, 20% and do my thing? Versus if I'm a super transactional company, like let's say I'm Drift and I'm selling to a company that's, swipe my credit card with Stripe and I move on. Do I create opportunities there and bring that back up? And my thought is definitely in the enterprise space, it's important to, I think, define what an opportunity is. I don't think most companies actually really clearly say an opportunity means this. And in my mind, an opportunity is a meeting with a person who has a potential to buy your product. So I typically set that threshold pretty low. That's typically a meeting with a person. So, someone at a various level within a company that has a potential to buy. So they are kind of in your ideal customer profile, or at least your TAM. The person is generally a director or above, depending on the type of company you sell to and the level you sell to. And they've got meeting with like an interest to hear about your product. In my mind, that is like when an opportunity gets created. As you go through your cycles of trying to sell to them, there are kind of two things a few things that'll happen. They'll say no, they'll say yes, they'll go dark, or they'll say I need to hold on. If they say yes or no, you're pretty straightforward. If they're dark, or if they say I need to hold on, those are kind of the same thing, because just because they didn't buy now doesn't mean that they won't. So if they go dark, I typically recommend you should move that opportunity to close lost, and you should have a reason being that it was because they went dark. If a person says, hey, I need to specifically hold on for 3 months while we get some budgets dialed in or we're getting through a big project, in my mind, you should have an intermediary stage, typically like 20% just on hold. So let's say your op is at 50%, you're in the middle of a review and they say, look, we got to pause. That should go to on hold for no more than like 6 months. If it's realistically going to go beyond 2 quarters, I think that there's just too much that can change for you to be able to just pick up the opportunity and run with it right where you were. So you might as well close losses timing. But if it's going to be somewhere in the 3 to 6 month range, it makes sense to hold it and have some sort of a nurture campaign to keep these things going and then pick it back up again at the right time. That creates some weird incentives, which we can talk about a bit, but that's definitely my thought on like when you should. I can't think of a situation where you move an op from 0% back up to 50 and keep it going, because from a reporting perspective, you want to understand this opportunity, like given an opportunity, what's the likelihood it closes? And if you're taking 2 independent shots at closing a deal, but you only treat that as one opportunity, you're completely fudging your numbers and it's not reflective of reality. So that's my reason why.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. I think I'm going to push you a little bit on the idea of moving it to hold. And my thought, and you're much more well-versed in sales than I am, but my thought is just by the nature of how quickly companies change and how quickly there's turnover among decision makers, it feels like even if you move it to close lost, you should probably reach out again and try to close it in 6 months.
I don't disagree with that at all. So in all the opportunities we track internally, there's always a next step date. And that next step date is a trigger that sends an email or Slack notification to the rep or various people internally saying a next action needs to happen. And when you lose a deal for timing, there's always a rep can either manually input a date. If they don't input a date that's in the future, we're just going to automatically bump that out 6 months with the intention of we need a process to review whether or not we should re-engage with this company or not. Because I think if you just allow for people to hopefully find that account, that's not going to happen. Maybe if you're selling enterprise, you only have 10 accounts in your pipeline, that's a different scenario. But realistically, you need some sort of a cadence or process for re-engaging with accounts. And in my mind, that's just like store a next step date on an account or on an opportunity so that when it dies, you've got a next thing that should happen.
Gotcha. But then in that case, it almost, could you then just get rid of the on hold and just move it to close lost if you want to re-engage soon anyway?
So like if prospect says, hey, talk to me in 3 months, you just say lose it for timing and then generate a new opportunity when they do, or are you saying you move it back up after 3 months, assuming you can get some traction again?
Like what I'm thinking is if they say, talk to me in 3 months, I can either lose it and just set a follow-up date.
Yeah.
Or I don't see why it's a terrible thing to just leave it in its current stage for 3 months and just adjust your close date.
Okay, so where I push back on that piece specifically is that you oftentimes want to do pipeline reviews, and an opportunity sitting at 75% that's realistically not going to close in the next 2 to 3 months isn't really at 75%. There's too many things that could happen in those 3 months that should imply that it's not where, because the 75% in my mind is indicative of how far along they are in the process. It's like a progress bar, right? Progress bars go fast and they go slow, then they go fast and they go slow. Progress bar shows how far compared to completion you are, not how close you are to actually completing it in terms of time or speed. So an opportunity at 75% is not a 75% likelihood of closing. It means they've completed 75% of steps. But if you know that they're taking a pause for 3 months, you have to assume that things are going to change in a material way, that you're not actually 75% anymore.
Okay, gotcha. So then it sounds like the on hold is a very, you're kind of threading the needle with the use case, because if it's more than 3 months, I would think you'd probably prefer to just close it. And if it's like a month, maybe that's like acceptable to just leave it in the current stage. So there's this like middle ground that the on hold is for.
Yeah, and kind of one of the rationales behind this is that, oftentimes you do account shuffles, right? Like we're going to take accounts from everybody, kind of mix them around so that we just mix up who the sales rep is. Salesforce literally does this, it feels like every 2 months to us. And so one way that reps will tend to protect their accounts that they like is they'll keep open opportunities. And so if they have 10 opportunities at 75% that are not about to close, they're essentially hoarding their accounts. I heard someone call it like licking something. Like it's like if you have food and someone wants a bite of it, if you lick it, they don't want a bite of it anymore. That's essentially what sales reps are doing by holding all these accounts open. But if they move an op to on hold, that's like a clear delineation saying, look, they're not about to close now, but I've got a real opportunity to close this at some point. They just need to pause for some period of time. If an op is on hold, I think a rep should have the ability to retain that for 6 to 9 months. But beyond that, if you haven't had traction in 6 months, that op needs to be closed lost and you can lose that account. But if you're able to actually make meaningful progress with this opportunity, then it should be at the right stage and you should own it. Like that's your deal for some period of time. Of course, companies are going to have different perspectives on the length of time there, but that on hold is like a way to show it's not active, but it's certainly not zero. And I kind of want to protect this because I think I can get it going. So within some sort of ditches that keep me between left and right, I should be able to keep this account.
Gotcha. Okay. Does your opinion change if it's a new logo opportunity versus an upsell?
Ooh, interesting perspective. So if you're a new logo, I definitely feel this way. If you're a sales rep, well, I guess companies handle upsells in two different ways of what I've seen, and you may see something different. So I'd love to get your thoughts. Is they'll either have the account manager is responsible for upsells or the sales rep tied to the account is responsible for upsells. Some companies just do things differently. If I'm managing account managers or I'm an operations person, I'm less concerned with account managers hoarding accounts the way that sales reps do, because sales rep compensation tends to be more closely tied to commission and they think that certain accounts are stronger than others. If a sales rep has an upsell, realistically, like upsell should be pretty quick, right? Because if you sold to a company before, they're going to make a decision right away to move up or move down or say, I need to pause for a significant period of time. So in those, I would say upsells should either be in the progress of being closed or they're just not a good time right now. I could be convinced that on hold makes sense. I guess given my pitch on why on hold is the way to go, do you agree based on where you were before, or do you still think not having that is the right way to go?
So I think I'm a fan of on hold in theory because and when I say in theory, it's because there is a very specific use case and there's a very specific window of time where it gives you more information, right? And that's the goal of everything we're doing is how do we get better insight into what's happening?
Yes, I would agree.
So there is definitely a very real scenario where it gives you more insight, which I'm a fan. I think if I were running sales, I wouldn't have on hold because I would just be too worried about everyone abusing it and not wanting to weigh down their close rates.
So you think that sales reps will like put stuff on hold rather than moving it to close loss so that they're inflating their win rate?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like weird energy that sales reps have around marking something as lost. And so I just see too often where whenever there's like a future interest stage or on hold stage or deal delayed stage, there's so many things that end up there that when you really talk to the rep, there's no chance this company buys.
You're probably right. There is a lot of hoarding that can happen where like, hey man, you got 30 ops in your pipeline, but 20 of them are on hold. This doesn't make any sense. Like your pipeline has 10 opportunities. That's probably where it's at. A lot of this is predicated on a pretty strong operations team and a strong automation and like clear reporting. And most companies are pretty not that solid at that. So I think that you're probably right where most companies that do put this in place don't have any reporting or backstop mechanisms to prevent abuse. And so it does get abused. But I think that it's a communism. If you get it exactly right, the right time without any abuse, it'd be fantastic. But the reality is everyone always screws it up. So that's kind of my thought is like, if you can be really solid and prescriptive, you can make this whole on hold thing work. If you're just going to wing it and hope reps don't abuse it, you're going to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me, here's the ultimate question is, given how you feel about on hold, and I'm kind of in agreement with you, what % of your clients would you recommend to do this?
I would probably tell them all of them. Let me think about this for a second. That was my gut reaction without actually thinking about it.
No, you want to tell all of them, but in 3 months when their data is totally muddy because 30% of their pipeline's on hold, you're screwed.
Yeah, but okay. So the number of ops on hold is a metric that should be considered. Would you agree?
Sure, but to what end? Like play that one out. So you track that.
So if I
on hold keeps
it's
going
like
up.
a canary in a coal mine. So if I go to a company and they're like, yeah, we have this on hold stage. And the first thing I do is look at it and see what percentage of the total open opportunities are considered on hold. If that was greater than 25%, I would say you probably have a problem. People are hoarding opportunities. There's no way that a quarter of your entire deal, all of your deals are on hold in a meaningful way. It should be like a handful of deals per rep. Because I think you're right. The point you made of like reps think that every deal is going to close. And so they really want to hoard stuff. I mean, I've had this problem myself where I just like hang on to stuff. The deal went well, the call went well. I would really push reps to like disqualify things. They should be looking for reasons why something's not going to work rather than like getting happiers and trying to make it work all the time. That said, you should have a mechanism for reps to be able to truly say something is on hold, but there should be clear reasons for doing that. Like they're doing it because they have another project that's ahead of us. So this has happened with Salesforce consulting. We're like, look, we want to start doing Salesforce consulting with you guys, but we got to wean off HubSpot first. That's going to take a little while before we're ready to move off HubSpot. Okay, cool. Let's talk. You've got a project aligned. Your start dates are in place. That's real. But if it's just like, hey, we had a great call. I think your pricing makes a lot of sense. Why don't we talk? And then they just go dark. So I moved on hold. That feels wrong. So a lot of it will require good management at the middle level of like managers to sit down as they're doing deal reviews with their team and say, okay, who is their champion? Are they like galvanized to actually close this deal? Or are they just telling you what you want to hear? Like, do they actually have budget aside? Have you spoken to the holder of the budget? No? Okay, well then you probably don't have a real deal here that's on hold. You're just like trying to hoard this account. So it's like, if you have, this kind of comes back to like a solid operations and management leadership team that's really clued into deals, it makes sense to have this. Again, that's more towards the enterprise side where like you don't have so many deals and it's worth each one being reviewed closely. If you're hyper transactional where it's one call closes, sales managers just can't stay on top of that because it's just too many to keep track of. So I would say that it lends itself more towards the enterprise space and less towards transactional companies.
Yep. I think that's fair. I think one more point on this idea of the canary in the coal mine for on hold. I think what would actually end up happening is you have this report that shows on hold, number of on hold continues to increase.
Yes.
This is a problem. And what ends up happening is the VP of sales is just going to say, just get rid of that stage.
That could happen for sure. If you see it being abused, that tends to be the knee-jerk reaction, but it's not actually addressing the problem.
Oh, totally not.
Right? Like, or lick the spoon. No one's going to use your spoon after you've licked it. So reps will always find a way by saying, we used to have this problem at a company I worked at or worked with where our rule was if you've touched an account within 90 days, literally had any email correspondence out to a company within 90 days, then you would be able to retain that account. We wouldn't be able to take it away from you. So like every 89 days, every sales rep would say like, hey, happy Labor Day. Hope you're doing well. And that would count as an interaction or like a message going out. So that would remove the account from potentially being taken away from them, which I don't like either. Like there needs to be some mechanism to realistically shuffle accounts around without allowing people to be like spoon lickers or whatever you want to call it that are just hoarding their own accounts.
Yeah, I think that is like a whole nother problem.
Yeah, it's like it's a major like operational challenge to make sure, because like I guess this is getting into another question, but like what's your thought on shuffling accounts period? I don't want to deviate too much from the conversation, but this definitely is a part of that.
I am a fan of having the inflow and outflow of accounts from reps names automated.
Ooh, so there's some like consistent process for doing that?
Yeah, so like I keep tracking, the analytics team built something. So periodically, if you've reached out to an account a certain number of times, haven't gotten a response, it'll automatically move that out and give you a new account.
Oh, interesting. So a rep would be working a smaller number of accounts, but they'd kind of always be cycling in and out based on whatever activity you've had with them.
Correct.
Interesting. I kind of like that. I had a guy I know, he works in sales at a company here in Bend, and he said his like revenue ops team delivers him 10 leads a week. That's all he gets. He has to work with 10 leads. At the end of the week, those leads are taken away, and he like only works those 10. So he's doing tons of research and really reaching out to them directly. At the end of the week, if they don't respond with a meeting, they move on, and he moves on to another one. They get put like in a nurture campaign or something, and he gets a new 10. So the RevOps team is constantly identifying people that are in buying mode, and he's only getting a few people, but he's got to be hyper prescriptive about it, like very it doesn't matter. We'll cut that part out. But anyways, he's getting these very few leads, and he's having to like process them and try to reach out to them before they're going to be taken away. But it sounds like that should be its own podcast topic that we should cover.
Yes, I think inflow outflow of accounts for sure. So let me just go through my notes here. So we talked about kind of your thoughts around creating new ops, resurrecting ops. So in your mind, is there ever a time when you would prefer they resurrect an opportunity?
No, I cannot think of a situation where if a rep goes, they're closed lost because they don't have budget, the company calls you and you say, I'm going to move it back up to 95%. The only caveat to that would be if you move an op to close lost and you say, hey, they're going with a competitor, and within the next day, they call you right back and say, look, that competitor fell apart. We actually want to go with you guys. That would be a situation where it's like, that's not a brand new opportunity. That's really the same deal. I guess I could also be convinced that if a company called you and said, you're right, we did pick that competitor, but it turns out we made a mistake and we actually want to go with you guys because they screwed up X, Y, and Z. That feels like it's the same opportunity. It's just that it was temporarily misclassified. I don't know. That feels like a situation where I'm like kind of breaking my rule, and I tend to like to be consistent. So in that situation, I would probably encourage the rep to create a brand new lead that was a contact me, or new opportunity, I should say, and then create a brand new opportunity, because it is a brand new sales potential, because you could still totally screw it up. You could still totally win it. The competitor could come back and beat you out again, and you would want to know that in two separate instances that we lost to a competitor. That would be the rule. What about yourself?
I think similar to you. Like if it's within a week and then something happens, I'm fine if you reopen an op. But
you should be intentional with that, right? It shouldn't just be like reps winging it and saying, yeah, I'm going to reopen this op because I feel like it. It should be like they need to go to the ops team and say, look, this is a real opportunity still. I was moving it to 0% because I thought this is what's different. I think we should open it back up. And it should be intentional. But, my guess is companies don't have the bandwidth for that. They're just going to let reps do it.
Correct. Especially, how many of the companies that we work with is the VP of sales also sales ops?
For sure. Yeah.
So not the norm, but if you're Series A or before, it's likely. So cool. Well, it looks like we have everything. As always, let us know if you have any follow-up questions that you want us to address. Kyle, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Cool.